Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon in this mid-October. Finally got a little bit of cool weather, which is nice. I am Brian Street, Castle Group's Executive Vice President for Field Operations. I've been with Castle since 2011. Seems like yesterday, but it's been a great time here, and I think we have a wonderful topic. But I'd like to introduce Donna, if you want to introduce yourself and talk about Becker.
Sure, thanks, Brian. I'm Donna DiMaggio Berger. I'm one of the shareholders over at Becker and Polyakov. I'm not sure I'm going to say how long I've been in this game, but I will say my son was in diapers, and now I'm in the midst of now he's an attorney in New York City. So it's been a minute. And I'm always delighted to join the Castle folks for this webinar series.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Today, obviously, we're nearing the end. I'm going to knock on some wood of, hurricane season. And luckily, we've been getting out of a lot of the concerns. The storms have been staying out in the Atlantic, which is nice. And so one of the topics that came up that Don and I were going over is, but what happens in the event of, either a storm event or, even the king tides coming in? Could just be a normal storm event that happens in South Florida sometimes. So we're going to go over, what's your responsibility as a homeowner? What's the association's responsibility? And then, the overall kind of path to recovery and what does that look like? And I see from my screen, I'm going to apologize in advance if my shirt looks a little psychedelic, but once we get to a larger screen, I think that goes away. So I do apologize in advance.
Brian, your shirt looks great.
It looks a little wonky, but so we'll go through that agenda today. And again, I have the Q&As open. And so we'll try to get through a couple of those questions as well that come in, and then we'll go from there. So overall, I know, Donna, you like to also do a little disclaimer, not providing legal advice. So if you want to do your quick little disclaimer, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, I mean, just overall, this is for educational purposes. Please don't rely on my representations. I'm not speaking directly to you. I know I've got some clients on here. Call me afterwards if there's any questions or follow-up you need. But yeah, we've got a great topic. And you know what, Brian? It's every association has casualty events throughout the year. In a multifamily building, water leaks are inevitable. So, people think about casualty like the big stuff, fire, flood, hurricane, but we see insurable casualty events throughout the year on a frequent basis in all our communities.
Absolutely, it's a great thing. And it's not just the fire flood things. It could be a number of different events that could happen, that could occur. So actually, Julie, if you want to throw up the first poll question, we always like to know, who is on our call today. As we get started, this will help, Don and I even tailor some of the communication that we have. So if you want to say, if you're an HOA, you're a condo, or hopefully you do know, but sometimes that always comes up, not quite sure where your townhouse possibly lies in that 718 or 720 rule book. But you're right, Donna, as we get people chiming in here, it is all about when something happens and whatever, and I'll just use that word in air quotes of something. It could be a major storm. It could be just a pipe burst in a high-rise tower. It could be something happening within an HOA, either landscape issues, the landscaper for the association, the lawnmower throws a rock through a window. There could be a number of different things that could happen throughout the community. So we want to kind of talk through, maybe even getting started on the unit boundary. What do we really own as a owner? And maybe break it up into the condo and the HOA as we wait for some our stats here.
Yeah, you just hit on it. It all starts who owns what, right? And then also who is responsible to maintain, repair, and replace what. So let's start with condo owners. For a condominium owner, the owner's going to own their four walls, right? Their box. And they're also going to be pro rata owners of the common elements. That's ownership. Now, when I'm looking for boundaries on a unit, I'm going to go to the declaration. I'm going to go to the section that outlines the unit boundaries. Most of the documents have that, Brian. I'm sure you've seen it as well, where it defines the horizontal, vertical, parametrical boundaries. Have I been surprised over the years? It's what I find sometimes. Yes, because sometimes those boundaries will include apertures. though
Mhm.
sometimes the unit will include the doors and the walls. I mean, the doors and the windows. Other
Mhm.
times it doesn't. So you really do need to take a look at the boundary definition. Then you're going to look at the boundary definition for common elements and limited common elements. For a homeowners association, when you're talking about a single family home and who owns what, you can't just eyeball it. So I do want to say that you're going to need to look at your survey. You're going to need to look at your deed that meets the legal meets and bounds. And you're also going to need to look at the plat because in a homeowners association, Brian, a lot of times those roadways,
Mhm.
they may extend into, on either side of the road into the swale area. So an owner may not own the swale on his or her lot. So you really do need to dig into the documents and not just eyeball your situation and go, I think I own this.
Absolutely. It looks like we have about a 60-40 relationship, 60% condos and HOA. So it's a good kind of a good mix. And I think this was really solid for us to go through. And I'll start with the homeowners. And you're right. Looking at the deed, and it's you also are going to have easements. There's utility easements that could happen. And again, you talk about an insurable event. What happens if you're installing new fiber optic cable and there's damage to your lawn, your driveway, things like that as they're going through the process there because the association has the right to install new utilities through that utility easement, which looks like it's on your lawn. It could be the swale, there could be swale trees, a number of different items in that space that you think might be yours from your home to the edge of the roadway or the curbing.
Or even
Late
in the
maintenance.
back,
Mhm.
Brian. So, for instance, I live in a single family home in a homeowners association that backs up to a golf course, but there's a canal between
Mhm.
us. Where does my lot line end?
Yep.
Actually, they redesigned the course, so now I have a portion of my lot that's submerged. It's underwater,
Yep.
which presents a whole host of other issues when it comes to maintenance. Because remember, I know we're going to talk about it, maintenance and repair obligations do not always dovetail neatly with ownership rights. But I would say this for HOAs, you need to look at the plat, okay? Because the roadways and a lot of other real property is deeded by plat. You need to look at your own deed and your survey, and you need to look at your documents. For condos, you need to look at, you own your unit, you
Mhm.
own a pro rata share of the common elements. The question is, what's your unit boundary and what are the boundary definitions for limited common elements and common elements? And that's
Yeah,
all going to be outlined in the governing documents.
no, and that's a great point. We get from the management standpoint asked that a lot, especially if there's an insurable event. Who owns the balcony? How does that work? And you used a lot of different terminology that hopefully everybody's comfortable with. Limited common elements, aperturants. So we want to make sure that everybody's crystal clear on what they own, and if they're not, don't assume. Go back to your documents. It will be spelled out, or go talk to management. They will be able to help you out either from the plat, from the survey for an HOA, or how the documents read from inside your box. What's important. So
Or get a legal opinion from your friendly community association attorney.
exactly right. Exactly right. So let's talk about, I started off with, we're nearing the end of hurricane season. It's been a fairly quiet season for us, knock on wood. But let's say there is some sort of storm or casualty event that occurred. What is the role of management in that regard, in the board of directors from, saying filing that claim? What, if there's some major damage to the condo, either the unit owner's windows and glass, the doors, the balconies, the roof, et cetera, like that. We'll start with the condos on this one first. So what is the board and management's responsibility?
Okay, so if there's an insurable event, and if I'm hearing you correctly, we're using the example of like a multifamily building. Okay,
Yes.
so the first thing is to determine the extent of the damage, right? Has it damaged one unit? Has it damaged a whole stack of units? What needs to be done immediately to dry in and dry out and mitigate any further damage? So I know normally the management team and the board, they're going to get a remediation company out there immediately to assess the damage. Now, once that's taken care of, because you don't want to have an acceleration of damage because you've got gaping holes, because you've got units or the roof. or other common elements exposed to the natural elements, okay? So first, assess the damage. Secondly, yes, you need to pull out your policy and you need to make a claim and you need to figure out what your coverage is. Now, the good news with hurricanes, if there is any good news, is we kind of know they're coming, right?
Mhm.
It's not like a flash flood, it's not like a tornado. We do have some advanced knowledge that they're heading our way. I suggest that every board brush off their emergency plan, they pull out their policies, they know what's covered, they understand what their deductible is. Ideally, they've taken date stamped video and photos so they can actually document what the condition of their project was before the damage occurred. So again, and by the way, as you said at the outset, we've been really lucky.
This year.
Made it. I mean, I knock
No,
wood.
we're knocking on wood. Yes.
No,
Still have 6 more weeks.
so
Yep.
far we got a few more weeks to go, but this has been one of the calmest hurricane seasons we've seen in a long time. But you should still, again, take out that emergency plan. If you don't need to have one, you've got to get one. Look at your policies. You should be doing that not just when renewal time comes around, but you should be doing that regularly because, as we said, we have casualty events all the time. Fires in server rooms, unexplained water leaks, all sorts of things.
No.
So in terms of, I would get with your agent, I would get with counsel, I would make the insurance claims if it's property damage that was sustained to the common elements or limited common elements or to portions of the units for which the association bears responsibility. So can I talk about that for a second,
Please.
post-casualty?
Absolutely.
So post-casualty for a condo, the association is responsible to insure, maintain, repair, and replace the drywall, the baseboards, if the units were originally constructed with baseboard, windows and doors. Now, for ordinary water leaks, Brian, somebody has a toilet that has leaked down or there's a pipe that has burst in the walls.
Mhm.
Normally, the windows and doors do not come into play.
But
But when
right.
we have a windstorm, they might. So
Mhm.
basically, the association's responsibility is to return the four walls of that white box back to the unit owner the way it was originally constructed. All those finishings, whether it's marble flooring, flocked wallpaper, the cabinetry, the furniture, all of that is on the owners. That's excluded under 718-111. The association's policy excludes all those interior furnishings and fixtures. That's where it is super important that owners have what's called an HO6 policy, which is to cover all those interior finishes.
Wait, actually, that's a great point. And before we move on, because I want to harp on a couple of those points there. Julie, can you put up the next poll question? And I know this is for condo owners. It is all about the HO6 coverage. And do we have it? Do you have it as an owner that you're aware of? And I really want to kind of go back to, you called it the white box, like, cold shell, white box, a lot of different terms are there. All of that fancy wallpaper that, was a huge kind of design element recently, that is not covered. That is part of the homeowner's responsibility to replace, even if there's a leak. And I want to make sure I'm correct on this. If there's a leak behind the walls and it causes damage to that, and then the mold remediation, water remediation company comes in, they have to tear that off and fix it. And you may not be able to get that same wallpaper back. That's where the HO6 coverage comes in, correct?
Yes, this is also, again, we have to distinguish between ordinary maintenance and repairs and post-casualty repair projects. So in the post-casualty arena, that is absolutely correct. The association's policy, the master policy for casualty coverage, will cover drywall, baseboard, windows, and doors. Everything else is on the owners. And by the way, if the owners don't have that coverage, then that's coming out of pocket. Here's what we saw after some of the major storms is that some people did not have that coverage, Brian, which meant
Mm,
there were years before certain units were brought up to, the condition that they existed in prior to the storm. That does have an overall impact on the property value in the community.
no,
So I guess
definitely.
what we're saying is get HO6 policies,
Yeah,
people.
policy, right. Yeah, as a homeowner, and then let's just for clarity purposes, if I'm the management company and the board and there's an event in a unit, we have to get the drywall back. So taped, sanded, everything back to a smooth surface, ready for, if you have other design elements on the surface of that sheetrock, correct?
Yes, but here's the thing, Brian, and I'm sure you've run into this. Sometimes a unit owner has a specific finish. I had one unit where they had Italian plaster. I mean, it was a gorgeous unit. And they
Right.
said they wanted their own drywall replaced. They did not want the association to go in, even though it was the association's responsibility post casualty to replace the drywall. They said, no, we want our installer. That was
Mm.
okay, but the association got a price from their installer of what it would cost to just put that drywall back standard. Remember, the way the developer did it, which is, builder ready, which is not typically super upscale in most communities. So they gave them a credit. The association said, this is what it would have cost for us to replace the drywall. We're going to write you a check for that. And that owner took
The
the bull by the
responsibility.
horns and had their contractor do the drywall and then reinstall the Italian plaster.
And that's great. So it looks like we have about 67% yes that do carry the HO6 coverage. So that's great news.
Yep.
8% no, but 25% don't know. And actually, one of the questions that came in, some people don't even know what HO6 coverage is. Could you go over that a little bit? I know you're not an insurance broker or anything else,
Yeah.
but maybe kind of conceptually what
Yes.
that is.
Thank you for that disclaimer. At some point, you'll have an insurance expert on again. But yes,
Yes.
HO6 coverage in a nutshell is a casualty policy that you would purchase as an owner, a condominium owner, for your interior unit. So it would cover your cabinetry, your flooring, your ceiling coverings, if you've got something on there, your fixtures, your wall coverings, your personal property. It's everything you need to protect the interior finishes in your unit if it's damaged. Now, I will also say that I'm seeing more and more unit owners also purchase flood coverage for the inside of their units.
Oh, interesting. And now, how is that? What's covered under that flood? Is that a water pipe, a main water pipe
No,
break?
flood is
Or
right. Again, not an insurance expert, but flood is rising water. But
Mhm.
we had a hurricane that devastated Southwest Florida a few years ago. And I think I had a partner, the water went up almost 20 feet.
Mhm.
He was on Fort Myers Beach. So,
Yes.
you think before maybe just first floor units, but no, not so much anymore. Second, third floor it may also be advisable to have flood coverage for inside your unit as well. So something
Yeah.
to think about for anybody who's listening and is going to call their insurance agent to get that HO6 coverage. You might want to inquire what it would cost to have flood coverage for the inside of your unit as well.
Definitely. And just from the capillary action of water, once it hits the drywall and the water actually will be transferred up the drywall and through the behind the walls as well there. So if you're hitting 10, 20 feet, that water pressure is actually pushing up and it could hit the second, third, possibly even fourth floor. That'd be a
Yeah.
little bit of a stretch, but definitely in those lower floors need to take a look at that. So that's a really good point. So actually, a great question came in, and I know these are some nuances as it pertains to what a unit owner owns. When you come in and all of the cabinets in the kitchen were original to the unit, you're almost coming into I'm going to expand upon this question, a fully furnished unit almost. So you didn't really buy that, but you have your cabinetry, your waterfall, countertops, etc.
Mhm.
How is that laid out? Is that would also be in the documents, correct?
Well, so again, remember, if we're talking about casualty, the association's only responsible for the drywall, the baseboard, the windows, and the doors. Okay, there's going to be an exception to that if negligence is involved, but that concerns regular maintenance and repairs. But post casualty, it's great that you came and you bought, it was a resale, let's say, or you originally bought from the developer and it had all the finishes. I'm only talking about the white box that the developer created, not all the
Mhm.
bells and whistles that went into the box. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Hopefully that cleared up some of those questions out there. And then the next one, and I know we've been harping on the HO6 coverage. Can a condo association or the board mandate that unit owners have to carry the HO6 coverage?
I love that question. So, as you know, years ago, the Florida legislature changed the law for just 1 year that said that associations could force place missing coverage. Because there's a real benefit, as we've been discussing, to make sure every unit is properly insured, both from the master policy with the stucco, the building envelope, as well as the white boxes, that everything's insured. So if there's a major catastrophe, everything will be, as you said at the outset, on the path to recovery, right?
Mhm.
That only lasted 1 year because the insurance industry really did not write policies for associations who wanted to buy them on behalf of owners who didn't. But there are ways to get around this, Brian. I like when I'm preparing amendments on screenings. So a lot of our associations have the right to screen new purchasers and tenants.
Yes.
And in that screening criteria, I like to make a requirement that they have proof of HO6 coverage. And not only proof of HO6 coverage, that they add the association as an additional insured. Now, why is that important? Because somebody could have coverage today and cancel it or be canceled it next week. So you do really want to have knowledge as an association that you've got that coverage still in, that your owners have that coverage still in place. So at least that's one way to get some of your units covered, is when you're
Hmm.
screening that the new purchasers have that coverage, that if they're going to lease, they have that coverage. I think it's even more important, Brian, to have that coverage in place interior if you've got a tenant in that unit. Because sometimes the communication from the tenants is not ideal. They're not necessarily the ones that are picking up the phone and calling your managers and saying, hey, I've got a leak in this unit. They may be calling the owner. The owner may be out of the country. And, there's delays in this communication. So that is why I think even more importantly, that when you've got your units rented, that there's proof of HO6 coverage.
No, and I like that. We use, there's lot of different platforms, tenant evaluation being one, and reviewing all that. And we always say, let's get with legal counsel, make sure that our leasing documents and everything aligns. And I believe we include that in a number of our associations for that exact reason. Those that are allowed to
Yeah,
have, long-term rentals and they're absentee owners. They live out of the
yeah,
country, they're not around. Maybe they have their own individual unit property management, and we'll see how that works. But you have to protect the overall asset of the building itself, which is important. And when those leaks happen, and we know they do, making sure that it's covered. So I like that. We did talk about a little bit about flooding, and I want to kind of go back now to the HOA side. And maybe there is another question here, Julie. I wonder from an HOA side, do they carry the flood insurance, or even if you're a condo, actually, you could. We talked about that earlier. Do you carry your flood insurance, even if you think you're outside of a flood zone? Recently, I
yeah.
know
I
the
mean,
couple big
so
storms that were on the
why,
coast.
as attorneys, again, we're not insurance agents, but as attorneys, we're always going to urge our boards to get as much insurance coverage as possible because we know that these kind of casualty events are inevitable, right?
Hmm.
Flood insurance, because it's a national program, is still relatively inexpensive. I know years ago there was a lot of discussion about getting yourself removed from the flood zone, getting remapped, to kind of get yourself out of that. I think from what I'm hearing from our clients, Brian, there's less interest in that more. There's more interest in making sure the proper coverage is in place. You also have to look at your documents. Whether you're an HOA or a condo, your documents may require flood insurance. For most HOAs, though, because if we're talking single family homes, they may not need that. It also depends on the kind of amenities the HOA may
Hmm.
have. So if you've got a clubhouse and you're in a flood zone, then yeah, you may want to get flood insurance, or your documents may require you to get flood insurance.
Right. No, totally agree. And we'll see how those items do come up. But I always find it fascinating because we live on canals and everything in Florida is flat. So where the water is coming from, and you have a lot of those exclusions and how that plays into it. Again, not an insurance agent. And we always say, go talk to your agent. They should be partners, similar to legal counsel. You have to
Yeah.
be able to sit across the table, understand the language, what's included, what's excluded, and making sure that you are covered from an insurable value standpoint. From a practicality standpoint, you should have that partnership to make sure that the association is covered properly. We did have a couple questions coming, and there may be some confusion around what does post casualty really mean? Can we define what that looks like?
Yeah. So post casualty basically means an insurable event. Now I'm talking about condos. Insurable event has happened. That's typically fire, flood, windstorm. It doesn't need to be a hurricane. It could be a tropical storm or just a windstorm. But a casualty event can also be an unexplained water leak or an explained one. A bursting pipe is a casualty. Okay? So we're talking about anything outside the scope of ordinary maintenance and repair. So you can look in documents instead of governing documents. And this is true for our HOAs too, because we've got a lot of HOAs that are attached townhomes, right, Brian?
Right.
They've got
Hmm.
one uniform roof, so you may have blocks of 4 to 6 townhome units connected. You've got to look at those documents too, because those also allocate who's responsible for the roof, who's responsible for the windows, who's responsible for the building envelope. You'd be
Right.
surprised sometimes owners are responsible for the building envelope, for stucco, for the roof. In condos,
Hmm.
sometimes I've seen unusual documents that make the owners responsible for some structural elements, for some
Hmm.
life safety elements. Sometimes the documents just completely fly in the face of logic and best practices. And that's when I would say really get with your management team and your legal team and talk about updating those documents because they may no longer, they may be decades old and they may
Right.
no longer serve your purposes. They may also require you to do things or ensure things that are no longer readily available in the marketplace.
Definitely. And we've seen from a structural standpoint, water is going to take the path of least resistance. So I'm going to go back to your townhome. You may have two, three, 4 units attached. Water hits the far left side where there's a leak present, and it traverses the entire length of that building and then goes into the far right side unit. And they're replacing their roof, they're looking, but it's the first one. So it's really making sure who has ownership and how to solve that problem and repair it when it's not your individual unit.
Can I give you an example really quick on that townhome? So that townhome, let's say we've got 4 attached. And under the governing documents, it says the owners are responsible for the roofs, even though it's a
Hmm.
it's a blanket roof. 2 of the owners have insurance covering that, 2 don't.
Yep.
What do you do? So you got one here that can fix it and one here that can fix it, and the 2 in the middle can't fix it. So, and that's gaping holes. This is what we're talking about when you're looking at the overall development scheme. Sometimes the overall development scheme of a community does not work over time.
Hmm.
It may never have worked in some instances.
Right. Exactly. Which goes back to your point. It's maybe time to review the documents, and most of those attached homes, they could be, 20, 30, 40, 50 years old now. And what was relevant in the, 60s and 70s is no longer relevant today.
Right.
So really need to take a hard look at that. And especially making sure that those items can be fixed. From a couple great questions keep coming in, and I know that these are probably actual things in their individual buildings, but let's say we have a nice condo tower and the association board, they have routine maintenance on their roof. Things are, doing things properly, but then the leak still occurs. Like you said, it just happens. And damages units below, either the penthouse or the top floor. How is that responsibility then subrogated? Is it the board's responsibility? Do we still just fix that, the white box, and then it's still ultimately
Yep.
the unit owners?
Okay, so the board is not negligent under the scenario you just gave me. They are performing consistent and routine maintenance. Nevertheless, a leak occurs. The association still has those same 4 obligations I talked about. Drywall, baseboard, if the units were originally constructed with baseboard. By the way, sometimes they're not. So you got to be careful because 718.111.11, it excludes and actually includes baseboard under the association's policy, but you may have gotten a unit that didn't even have baseboard. So you might have an owner upgrade as baseboard. So you need to talk to council about that. But as long as there's no negligence involved, the association's going to go down. Let's say 4 units in a stack were impacted. They're going to go and they're going to do their repairs, drywall and baseboard in those 4 stacks. But let's
Hmm.
flip it. Let's say that there's an owner on the 4th floor who did not maintain an appliance, or they were renovating their bathroom and their plumber punched through a pipe, and that's the cause of the leak that's impacting all 4 units. In that case, the association would still go take care of those 3 lower units, right? But that's when
Hmm.
you can go after and have the association's insurance company subrogate against the 4th floor owner's insurance company. Now let's make this a little more interesting. let's say the fourth floor owner doesn't have any insurance, right? So they have
Right.
no insurance, so there's nobody to subrogate against because they don't have interior, they don't have that HO6 coverage. That's when you can go after them for a negligence claim for whatever the association has laid out. I don't know whether or not they'd be judgment proof. That's a conversation for counsel. But I do want to say that I recommend for all my clients that they create a water leak policy and an absentee unit owner policy. Now, why is this important? Because you've created a framework and a basis to establish negligence if the owner decides to just completely ignore those policies. So in the
Hmm.
water leak policy, we may say, look, you need to replace your water heater every 7 years regardless. If you think it's still working, we want it replaced. You've got to report immediately if you see a leak. You've got to mitigate your damages by getting it out to us. If you're going to be gone from the unit more than, let's say, 12 consecutive days, you have to designate a local caretaker that we can get in touch with, and you have to shut off your water to the unit. There's a host of things that we can put in a water leak policy and an absentee unit owner policy that will help later in the event that there is a leak and there is damage to establish whether or not the owner in that unit committed negligence.
Yeah, I think that's a one that we always run into where it's not the association's responsibility. It is the unit owner 503, and they're replacing their toilet, and it goes down to 403. And yes, it's passing through association space, but making sure that they have the proper insurance. And all the time we run into ones that have insurance, ones that don't, and
Yeah.
who's going to cover what, and it can last forever, which kind of gets into our kind of path to recovery. Instant. So we have the insurance now, but most of those items, especially water extraction, they have to happen immediately before the broker can even make their way to the property. You know, we don't even know the full extent of the project until that water extraction. What should be the unit owners? I'll start with the unit owner first. What should be their first course of action when there is a flood? And we don't know if it's association or another unit, or they just now see water dripping into their unit. And I'll say with the condos first.
Okay, so we're not talking flood like from a storm that's rising.
No,
We're
I'm
talking
thinking,
water. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, that's where the water leak policy is so crucial, in my opinion, because they will have to report that immediately, but no later than 24 hours. Because we know the more that water is dripping into that unit, the greater the likelihood that there's going to be mold. And again, depending on the duct system and if the plenum space, if there's ducts running through it, that this may travel. Mold has a
Hmm.
tendency to proliferate. So it's
Yes.
really important that owners mitigate their damages. When we're talking about mold, I think this is a really important point. A lot of times I will say to clients, look, this holds true in a multifamily building. You need to take steps immediately to stop the spread of mold. If there's any life safety issues, to address them. We can always work out who pays for what after the fact. And we
Hmm.
know in the statute, if you look at the emergency powers language in 718, we know that the association has the ability to immediately go into units, hire a restoration company, and charge back those costs to the owners. So they don't have to sit there and wait for an owner to say, okay, I agree with you. You can go into my unit and dry it out. The emergency powers give the board that right. And it's surprising, Brian, because a lot of boards don't even know that. And they don't
Yeah,
know
let
that
me,
they can
I want to
charge
go.
back those costs.
I think that's really an important topic I want to kind of hone in on, because when there is an issue and you have either an absentee or maybe a disgruntled homeowner that
Yeah.
doesn't want to allow anybody into their unit, we've run into that as well. We knock on the door, they won't let anybody in. What should the board do in that case from the emergency powers? Does it have to go through a board meeting? What's the process there if we know that there is an issue?
Yeah, so you don't have to go through a board meeting. The emergency powers are given to you. They're endowed by statute. I do recommend some notice. Now we've got open carry and everybody's weaponized, so be careful. I'm not suggesting you just bust into a unit. If it's a vacant unit and you know that there's not a tenant in the unit, you know that the owner is out of state or out of country, shoot them a quick email, call them, but let them know we're coming in, right? Now,
Hmm.
hopefully you've got access. That's another thing. The 718 gives the board the right to access units, particularly when it comes to an emergency situation. you see water coming out of the unit door, you see flames lapping out from under, you've got the right to go in there. In that case, you'll call emergency services, you'll let them address the situation. But hopefully you've got a key. If you don't have a key or a key code to get into the unit, I think you need to start addressing that now. That's part of your emergency plan that I talked about. And you let those people know who have not provided you a key that, hey, if there's an emergency or post-casualty event that we need to get into your unit to immediately dry in, dry out, we're going to have to gain access any way we can, which includes breaking a window, knocking down a door. Association's not going to be responsible for it. But yeah, you're going to have to get in there. I always say give notice because you don't want any surprises. You don't want anybody to be hurt going into a
Right.
unit.
Yeah, and that's our belief from the management side is you got to pick up the phone, you got to call the individuals, try to get somebody on the phone before you take those more drastic breaking down the door, locksmith, things of that nature to get into those units. What about and we talked a little bit about the limited common elements, and I know windows are always one of those tricky ones from a condo standpoint. What if the association mandated that the owners are responsible for the windows and you have to upgrade your windows? The owner does, and that now causes leaks. They're either improper installation or anything, and that now causes issues. Is that also still covered under the HO6, or how would that play out?
Oh God, that gets really complicated. So
Of
first of
course.
all, so let's say the windows are part of the unit and the
Hmm.
documents say the owners are responsible to maintain their units. That's easy, right? That's
Yep.
regular maintenance. So the documents say units are included in the windows are included in the unit boundaries. And then it goes on to say owners are responsible for their windows. That's easy. Now let's say that the windows are not part of the unit boundary, but the documents say the owners are responsible for the regular maintenance and repair and replacement of windows. It's not part, this is where people say, I don't own it. Doesn't matter if you don't own it. If the documents
Hmm.
say as an owner, you're responsible for the ordinary maintenance and repair and replacement of your windows, that's on the owners. Now, yes, in Florida, because we want these buildings hardened to withstand major storms, the statute also says that the membership may take a vote to allow the association to install impact glass or hurricane protection in all the units. That's another option. The members could say,
Hmm.
hey, board, we want you to stick these windows in to harden every unit. That's one option. But remember, again, we're talking about regular maintenance and repair. If I've got somebody on the 8th floor, are they going to be able to perform regular maintenance on that window? Maybe, maybe
Right.
not. So this is part of that equation of who's in the best position to
Hmm.
maintain these windows. Obviously, if it's a 2-story townhome, that's not a problem. If you've got windows where you really need to have a swing stage, then maybe and right now that's on owners to maintain and they're not doing it, then maybe you should think about changing your documents. The party who's in the best position to maintain should probably be doing it. You're going to spend money either way, Brian. So if the
It's that, yep.
responsibility is on the owner, okay, and they're not doing it, what happens next? They're calling me to send a demand letter to say you've got a deadline to do this. And then if there's self-help in the language in the documents, we say if you don't do it by this time, we're going to do it and here's what it's going to cost. So I know the equation is usually, oh, let's push stuff on the owners because we don't want to pay for it as a common expense. I think that's sometimes short-sighted thinking. And I'll tell you why. Number one, what I just said, you could be chasing down a lot of people for enforcement. But also, remember, you get those credits when your building's hardened for your insurance premium.
It
So if
helps.
you can't show that you have 100% of your units hardened and protected, because 20% of your owners are still maintaining their old windows, you got to do a cost benefit analysis here.
So you brought up the self-help, and I've always found this fascinating. So, the association comes in, they make the fix, they make the repair, and say, this is actually in conjunction with one of our questions here. It's a $10,000 expense. So we put that onto the homeowner's ledger. Now the homeowner comes back and goes, "That's way too much. I can't afford to pay the $10,000." Now, so now it's on their ledger, self-help, the issue got fixed because that's the responsibility or the option for the board. that just becomes a natural due to the association, and you just follow the normal
Well,
collection
it
process.
depends. You can only put it on their ledger if that you have self-help provision that actually
And
says you
yes.
can collect the special assessment you're going to impose against that unit owner for failing to meet their maintenance obligations with regard to the windows. Because sometimes it doesn't say that, right? You can replace it, but you can't collect it like a special assessment. But assuming under your example that you have the right to actually specially assess and then lien for that, put it on their
Mhm.
ledger. One of the things I think it really depends on how you communicated that option to the owner ahead of time. What I like to do is say, look, if we do it, you're going to have no say with regard to the contractor or the pricing. If you do it by this deadline, as long as you use the licensed and insured contractor and it complies with the installation protocols, that's on you. You get to choose your contractor, you get to
Mhm.
choose the price. But at least that way up front, you've told them what's going to happen. So they can't come back later and say it was too expensive. They had an option and a deadline to do this work themselves.
Definitely. That's our procedure. And, most of the time it flows smoothly, and they'll just decide to go with the association's vendor of choice because they're probably doing multiple units and get a better pricing. But it always, I think, scares homeowners sometimes when they see the true price of this, to then go out and find a competent vendor.
Yeah.
So I know we've been chatting a lot about the condos right now. A few questions have come in from a homeowner standpoint. Can an association mandate that you have homeowners insurance, or are you allowed to, be self-insured?
Yeah, again, the statute is silent on this, so it really boils down to what your documents say. Again, I live in a homeowners association, single family homes. I don't know. Yes, there is an interest in the fact that if I don't have sufficient insurance coverage, this happened in my community to a home. We had somebody with a fence that was laying down for 8 months because they didn't have the insurance to replace it. How do you address that? You
Yeah.
address that through your architectural control protocol that says if you, homeowner, suffer a casualty event, um, regardless, you got to fix that roof within X number of months. You've got to replace that fence within X number of months. That is more of an incentive for our single family homeowners and HOAs to go out and get the proper insurance coverage. Otherwise, they're going to come out of pocket. If they don't make those repairs, those post-casualty repairs to their homes and lots, then they're going to be subject to enforcement action for the architectural control violations because they've got a blue tarp on their roof for 9 months, or they've got a fence that has been, in a damaged or lying down condition for 8 months. Or the
Right.
house still looks like it's been damaged and no repairs have taken place because they either don't have insurance or they're haggling with their insurance company. I
Right.
don't
Or
think,
they've gone self-insured and don't have the funds available to make the repair, which, becomes an eyesore for the association and the neighbors. And I've even seen where some residents have just got up and left. They didn't have the funds. The home was
yeah.
basically inhabitable after a major casualty event. And the home has been, I know they still own it, but they've kind of walked away, which is also scary. And it's just left uninhabitable.
Can we talk about self-insurance for one quick second?
Please.
For most of the people who say they want to self-insure, what they really mean is they don't want to insure. Because if self-insure means I'm not going to pay an insurance company to the premiums to cover this damage, but I have sufficient funds to cover this damage myself.
Mhm.
I have a friend who has lived on the ocean for years and he didn't want to pay for the windstorm coverage, but he had reserves that if his roof blew off, he would be able to write a check and replace the roof. That's self-insurance.
Hey, right.
Self-insurance is not, I'm not going to pay an insurance company to insure this, but I also don't have the money should everything get destroyed to replace this.
Yeah. And that's I think the scarier part. No one likes to write that premium check every single
Yeah.
year, and I get it. I'm one of those. It's one of those things. But it's a necessary business expense because I also don't have the cash available. If the roof blew off, I don't have enough to rebuild my house. To be able to cut
Nor
that
do
check.
I.
Right.
So I
Exactly.
write
So,
the same check.
right. And I think that's the part that for those that are, opting in for self-insurance, I think it's being able to have a stronger conversation from either can well, this goes into the question, can the board even get involved in those conversations if I'm a homeowner, or do they have to kind of stay from an educational standpoint, stay, completely hands off.
Well, if the association does not have any responsibility to ensure your roof or your building envelope, then it's really not, they really don't have a dog in that fight, even though, as I said, from an aesthetic perspective, you really do want all your single family homes as well to have coverage. This is where you need to address this from the architectural control standards in terms of how you want the place to look post casualty. I think
And
that conversation for a single family homeowner is best had with legal counsel and and their own insurance agent and their
definitely, and what,
financial advisor.
that another point. What about the architectural components? I also think it's a great opportunity now to review what you've been approving over these last several years. A lot of associations haven't updated their architectural components in many, many years. The quality of paint, the quality of roof, the quality of stucco have all changed over the years. And being able to either modernize your association or even just bring it up to current standards of what's available. I think it's a great opportunity to meet with legal counsel, to meet with either people in your association too. That you may have architects that are in your, or landscape architects, or anybody that could help the architectural review, so that you can hold the owners accountable. And that's, I think, the hardest part.
Absolutely. We've got so many owners right now, so many associations, Brian, that are undertaking concrete restoration projects or have just completed concrete
Yes.
restoration projects as a result of their milestone inspections. And in the past, these boards may not have really thought about, the acceleration of damage that the hard flooring or the artificial turf can do on those concrete balcony surfaces. But more and more, now that they've just spent all this money restoring the concrete in their buildings, to say, we're upgrading our concrete, our construction protocol, and we're not going to allow owners to continue to put items on top of the newly restored concrete surfaces.
Oh, interesting. No, that's a really good point. So I think that's, again, bringing in your partners and reviewing, now that you've made all these changes,
Yeah.
what else, what's next? What else do we need to change to
And
make sure
how
that
do we
we stay on track?
preserve these changes? How do we maintain them? How do we get more life out of the concrete restoration?
Right. So I want to I know we've done about the last 10 minutes, got a couple other topics, especially for the HOAs, that, a lot of our swale trees, especially here in South Florida, when the developers were building up a lot of these large HOAs, they put in these beautiful, small caliper live oak trees that have now grown for the last 25 years. And either, from root pruning to the canopy's gotten large. In the event of a casualty event, say one of the trees that is association owned and responsibility falls on a house, what can be done? What should we do? Where does the limit of liability fall from an HOA standpoint, from routine maintenance and everything else?
Yeah, great question. So if it's an association owned tree, so the association bought the tree, they planted it in your swale, and then they forgot about the tree. They
Yeah.
never pruned it. They didn't take steps to get it prepared for storm season, or maybe they overly pruned it. They hat racked it.
Mhm.
They used certain techniques that are not advisable, and then the tree falls. I think a homeowner has a potential complaint for negligence if they can prove it. Now, this is a little bit different in a lot of our homeowners association. We have trees that are planted and owned by the homeowners. And there's years of case law in Florida that basically says, look, if a tree root, if I'm my tree extends to roots, you can't go after me for that damage as the homeowner. But if I don't trim it and my branches are going over onto your lot, then you can trim it. Again, I say this with, you really need to get specific legal advice on this, because the law does change. There are different appellate decisions on these types of claims, but it will make a difference. Who owns the tree? Who planted
Mhm.
the tree? Who's responsible to maintain the tree? Let's talk about swales really quickly
Yeah.
too. Sometimes the swales are only for maintenance purposes. They're, like you mentioned, utilities. So a lot of times in our homeowners associations, we have swale areas in the front. We may have berm areas in some of our HOAs where the association's landscapers have the right to go back there. Maybe
Hmm.
they have to do maintenance because the bodies of water, the canals, maybe those are on the association. Maybe, again, got to go back to that plat. What was
Yep.
platted? Were there bodies of water that were platted to the association? In which case the association's now responsible to maintain them. So they may need to get through your lot to go back and undertake that maintenance. As a homeowner, you do not want to prevent your association from performing necessary maintenance duties under the documents and whatever operating agreement they may have with South Florida Water Management District, because your stubbornness in doing so may put the entire association at risk.
Definitely. And back from my engineering days when we would design these drainage systems, all of those lakes and canals and swales all tie together
Yes.
to ensure that you're cleaning the water before it goes out into the major C4 canals and everything else. So you as a homeowner, you can't stop the landscapers from coming in and properly maintaining the lake banks. So a lot of times you may say, I want the fence line to be completely from property line to property line, but there's an easement. You have to have that
Yes.
access easement in order for the landscapers to be able to get onto the lake to properly maintain, or when South Florida comes out with their boats because they're spraying for the different weeds and things, or even populating the lake with fish. So there's a lot of different things that happen throughout the overall process.
Absolutely. And if you've got gates in some of these communities where where the back of the homes back onto canals or lakes, then you're gonna have to keep that open to allow, to allow access. And if not, that's when they call me. And then we say, you gotta do this.
Right. Well, I want to end with one last thing. Obviously, with a lot of the stuff that happened with the SIRS and everything else, reserves has been a big topic, constantly. And now you have a casualty event. How can your reserves be possibly used to make some of those repairs in the short term? And what it would be the procedure around using those reserves if you have maybe pooled reserves or something along those lines?
Okay, well, SIRS are to be used only for SIRS components, right?
Yes.
So if your elevators go down and your engineer has not included your elevators as a structural component, you are not going to be able to use what we call those subsection G mandatory SIRS components to address anything other than a SIRS component. Okay, but now again, you got to look at the emergency powers. You have the right to specially assess. You may need to take a loan to fund repairs. I would tell people this in the aftermath of a casualty: don't 3 days in sign a $20 million repair contract. Okay, what you need is a much smaller contract just to tarp the roof, again, to mitigate your damages, to prevent
Right.
any further damage from occurring. You
That
still
stopgap.
Right, you still have time to do all the necessary due diligence on your contractor, and make sure that that contract is vetted and reviewed by legal counsel. I've seen many mistakes made in haste, Brian, because they get pressured. They're looking at a building that's been really significantly impacted, and a contractor puts contract under their nose and says, let's get started.
Right.
Don't throw due diligence out the window. You have time to figure out how you're going to fund these repairs, whether they fit within the SIRS. Don't forget, we also still have non-SIRS reserves
There's
in many
exactly
communities
right.
that you might be able to tap into. Need to speak to legal counsel whether or not a membership approval is needed for the use of reserves funds. There's no membership approval ever to use SIRS reserves for non-SIRS
Sure.
purposes.
Yeah, you can't do that. No, and that's really good. And I kind of want to end with our last, kind of couple of minutes here. We say this a lot through all of our webinars here, Donna, is it's all about bringing your partners in. And I saw a lot of questions that have come through and very specific to their individual association, either HOA or condo. Reach out to legal counsel. And yes, we know that there's a fee associated to really review, but it's going to be money well spent to get the right answer, because you're not going to have the answer. And when you're in an emergency type situation, people tend to make a bad decision. So do the stopgap, stop the water, stop the leak, tarp up, do what you need to do, get the water extracted quickly so that there's no further damage, but then bring your partners in. bring the insurance carrier, bring legal counsel, bring, if you need an engineer or what have you, management, so that we can sit around a table and then make good decisions. I think that's probably the most important thing that we come from all of this. Again, not being insurance people, is wanting to have a great plan in place when there is a casualty type event, whatever that event looks like.
Oh, that's great advice. And listen, don't just go with the pattern of practice that's been in place for a long time. We've got a lot of communities that don't have professional management. They never reach out to legal counsel except for the odd collection case they may have. And they may have a belief in mind about who is responsible for what, both in terms of insurance, maintenance, repair, and replacement obligations that may not dovetail at all with what their governing documents say or what the statute requires.
Right.
So for those
And
people
the
listening,
statutes have
even though
changed a lot too. I mean, this has
it,
probably been these last couple of years,
yeah,
more changes have happened in the last 25 years, in the last two. I would, so really making sure that you're staying compliant, and so that you can't be challenged.
yeah, and if you set the wrong precedent, it's hard to unwind that.
Absolutely. So again, I know we're coming down to our last, minute or so. Any final thoughts from your end, Donna?
I think we mentioned it, which first of all, know what you own, know where your unit boundary is, and this holds true for our HOAs too. You know,
Yes.
you stand in your front yard and you go, yeah, my lot goes to the street. Maybe it doesn't. My lot
Mhm.
goes to the canal or the golf course. Maybe it doesn't. You need to look at the plat, you need to look at your survey, you need to look at your deed. For our condo owners, again, sometimes it's very illogical, Brian. You may think you've got the responsibility for the balcony, or you may think you do not. And it's
Right.
actually the reverse. So you really do need to understand what you own, and also sometimes what you own does not necessarily correlate with what you're responsible to maintain and repair.
Exactly right. I think that's a great way to put it. So it's review your documents, and if you have questions, ask management to help, ask legal counsel to help, to make sure that you're crystal clear on what your responsibility is. You may own it, but you don't have to maintain it, or vice versa.
Right.
So I think it's really
Exactly.
important. So again, Donna, again, always I learned so much doing these with you. So thank you very much. I see some kudos coming um, through the chat as well. So I thank all of our listeners here. And thank you again. And I see our contact information is on the screen. So feel free, reach out. And I wish we could get to all the questions, but I think most of those were some site specific. I would definitely say reach out to your legal counsel.
Till next time, right,
Yes,
Brian?
definitely, Donna. Thank you so
Thank
much.